Hi, everyone. I am so pleased to be here with Dr. Ismahane Elouafi, who is the Executive Managing Director of CGIAR, the world's largest global agricultural innovation network. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's so nice to see you. It's been a while.
Thank you so much, Dani. Always a pleasure to join and talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to start with a sort of a simple question for our viewers and listeners. Can you explain what the CGIAR does and why it's important?
Thank you very much, Dani. Definitely with pleasure. So CGR stands for Consultative Group for International Agriculture Research, and it's the largest publicly funded uh, international agriculture science. So what we do in the CGR is providing the knowledge, the technology, the policy, the support to countries when it comes to their agricultural system and what we call food, land, and water system. This is a public good institution that provides knowledge, that provides data, that provides innovation, technologies, policy support to mostly the least income countries and the low middle income countries.
Can you talk about, I love that you use the term public goods because this knowledge really is meant for countries to use to benefit, their food security, their nutrition security, their resilience to climate change, and so many other things. And I'm wondering, how has the CGIAR changed over the last several decades? You started very, focused on technology and research, and I'm wondering how things have evolved.
I think, Dani, the institution is the CGR is very known for the Green Revolution. And within the Green Revolution, it was mostly uh, emphasizing increasing productivity in staple crops and staple animals and staple fish. And that was really very useful in the last 60 years because it has averted the famine for about 1 billion people. It has saved what we are finding with data, we are saving about anywhere between 3 to 6 million kids from dying for malnutrition. So definitely at that time, we were commodity based. We were mostly focused on productivity. What have happened over the last year, given the climate change, given the better understanding of nature that we got to
Right.
um, because we know better science and we understand better species and species interactions, is that we have moved from commodity based to system based. So what we are doing now, it's not talking about wheat, it's talking about wheat based agricultural systems. And we are not talking only about productivity, we're talking about productivity, but alongside, we are looking very much at adaptation to climate change, but also nutrition. And hence, that took us to a systemized way of doing our science, looking at the system level, but also pushing for biodiversification and pushing for a larger diversification of our plate, our agri-food systems, our partners, and
Right.
our players along the value chain or along the agri-food system chain.
It's so nice to see that sort of focus on diversity. And as you mentioned, not just in, what's on the plate and partners, but sort of diversity of thought and innovation. And it's sort of watching that from the outside, how, even over the last, 5 years, the CG system has sort of evolved is really exciting and interesting. You mentioned, because the effects of the climate crisis are increasing, that has changed how the CG system sort of works. What are your partners and the people you work with seeing on the ground? What are they hearing from farmers about the climate crisis, and how are you responding to that?
So I think I always say every one of us feels it. Be it we are a farmer or a city person, I think we can't anymore deny the climate change. So we have much more longer drought, we have very unpredictable patterns, we have dropping of yield because of climate change, either because of heat or because of carbon concentration in the air. So I think really what we are hearing from the farmers, it's it's the increase of unpredictability of the weather. So the variability and the unpredictability is very difficult, particularly when you don't have access to irrigation. And that's the case in Africa. One of the major differences between Asia as a continent and Africa as a continent is that in Asia, we have about 58% irrigated land in their agricultural system. In Africa, we have about 8%. So
Right.
hence the fact that you don't have access to supplementary irrigation makes you at the mercy of the rain and the
Right.
weather. And we are seeing really some dramatic decrease of yield. Last year, the El Nino was a huge risk to many farmers, particularly in East Africa. And what
Right.
happens, East and South Africa? So what happens there, for example, if we didn't have the drought tolerance maize in Zambia,
Hmm.
would have dramatically affected those regions. So what I'm hearing from the people, it's a recognition of the climate change, a recognition that uncertainty is much higher, variability much higher, and hence having the right varieties that can produce well under certain climatic, but still produce some under worse climatic condition. It's very, very important to the farmers, particularly the
Very
small scale farmers that it's subsistence farming. So they
right.
farm to eat and get income. So they don't have other choices.
Absolutely. And those folks, those small scale farmers are again most at risk of the impacts of the climate crisis. So we need to have those tools in place so that they can, not just survive, but actually thrive under these circumstances. You mentioned, that
And Danny, I want to just add that there are 550 million small scale farmers. Until today, they're still producing 80% of our food.
right.
So, in terms of number, it's a huge population. In terms of fragility to climate change, it's unprecedented. It's a huge fragility and vulnerability to climate, but they're still producing 80% of our food. So, not only they are important for themselves, they are important also for the survival of all of us on this planet.
Such a good reminder. And again, that's 550 million small scale farmers producing 80% of the world's food. And I think, we often forget that. You mentioned earlier that it's hard for most of us to deny that climate change is happening. But here in the United States, where I live, we have a government that is denying sort of the impacts of climate change. And I wonder, does it concern you? Um, that funding is being pulled for so many important projects, including many things that the U.S. Agency for International Development was working on, whether it was food aid or agricultural research. How concerned are you, with the sort of long-term effects of this cut in a major international agency?
Danny, I'm very concerned for the last few years. I think particularly since COVID started, I think really what we are seeing that the hunger is rising, but we're seeing really that the funding is falling. I think everybody should remember that we have still 700 million people that face hunger in 2023. And that means one in every 11 people globally is going to bed without food and
Mhm.
feeling hunger and malnourished. And it's every person in five in Africa, every person in five people in Africa. And the number of those people going hungry every day hasn't improved for 3 days in a row. And we see the data that comes from FAO, from the SOFA and the SOFI documents. And yet, investment in agri-food system is declining. Only 7.4% of agricultural ODA in 2021 went to research,
Right.
despite that we have proven really the impact of science and the fact that for every dollar spent in research, you get $10 back. So I'm quite concerned because if we were doing better in hunger, you would understand that maybe the investment is falling down.
Right.
But as the hunger numbers are going up and not getting better, and that's a reality since 2017, as a matter of fact, but it worsened a lot with the
Sure.
COVID and with the other geopolitical events. So hence, I think we need more today than ever to really invest in science, invest in solutions, invest also in scaling up those solutions, particularly for those small scale producers, though, so that they can produce better, produce with less input, but also produce product that is high quality and nutritious so that they cut on hunger in their own communities.
Yeah, I mean, I think the value of agricultural research cannot be underestimated. It's so huge, the impact that it has, and with that gone, with much of it gone because of the cuts to the U.S. Agency for International Development, we're going to see increasing hunger. I just think there's no doubt that we'll see increasing hunger, poverty, and farmers not being able to become resilient to many of the things, whether it's another pandemic or the climate crisis. You mentioned, the geopolitical events that impact farmers around the globe. Can you sort of describe, what's been happening since 2017? It seems like there's been sort of, we've had a confluence of events that have really sort of dramatically impacted farmers around the globe.
So I would say definitely the COVID pandemic has been disturbing quite a lot the supply chain and the production systems, and it put on hold everything for at least a year, if not more, in some countries. We saw definitely the Ukraine war has affected dramatically the staple food. We saw what's happening in Gaza with Israel Palestine. Again, a huge use of food as a weapon and a huge effect on a population. So you see the issues in DRC, Somalia, you name it. It's across
Right.
the board. We have more and more hungry people. Either they are because of climate change or human-made conflict. So that tendency that we see over again and again has shows that the displacement of communities and people, either within a country like Chad or between countries,
Mhm.
it's in the increase, and it is in the millions in terms of numbers. What's also scary, I find myself really, Dani, is that the average of a refugee in a camp, it's not days, it's not weeks, it's months and months.
Right.
And that I don't recall the right number, but it's around 2 years, more or less, and we can get the number from the Organization on Migration and Displacement. But really, it's not in days. I always thought it's a matter of days, of weeks. But
Hmm.
when I got into the data, it's matters of months and years.
Wow.
And
Wow.
hence, we need to address it. We can't let really a kid born in a refugee camp and they live all their life there without the right food, without the right education, without the right environment to grow and thrive. And hence, the way we are doing international development has to change, and investment for international development, including the science and the solutions, the innovative solutions that can allow us to have a higher impact with a lower investment, it's very much needed today more than ever.
Sure, sure. I'm glad that you brought up, that we need science to help, solve some of these issues. And there's a quote that we pulled out that you said that people are thirsty for hope, and that's what science brings. And so, I wonder, what does it do to, sort of the morale of scientists around the world and researchers around the world and farmers around the world when this funding is decreased and they don't have the same access to, investment into their research.
Yeah, it's a very difficult environment, Dani, definitely. And do we see many organizations that are grappling with it? So for me, Dani, is that it's very important to recognize science, and science bring in solution, and science bring in things that will cost less to produce more. But it's also very important to recognize that science has to be shared. Knowledge has to be shared with those that cannot produce it themselves. And that's really, for me, the mission behind CGR. It's not only to do science and find solution, but to provide countries that do not have their own capabilities to provide that knowledge, to have access to that knowledge so that they catch up and
Right.
they develop themselves. Unless we do that, the gap between high income countries and low income country will keep growing. And what we
Right.
need to do is really reduce that gap, and knowledge can allow us to do that. And that's why I think all scientists feel frustrated and feel helpless when they know that they can produce solutions, but they don't have access to that funding to bring the solutions. And for us as CGR, we developed a new portfolio 2025 to 2030,
Right.
which is really focused on scaling innovation, scaling partnership, particularly with the South, but also looking at South-South triangular cooperation and science-based solution for food security. So we are really going out there, talking to our partners and our funders and telling them that really with climate change, you can't slow your science.
Right.
Rather, you need to speed it up. The fact that the hunger is the numbers are not doing well, you need to invest more to find those solutions, but you need also to invest more in making sure that the innovation make it to the farmer. So we need also to bridge that gap between applied science and developmental scaling up initiative and programs. And that's really what we have been doing in the last few years. We have some success stories with working with the World Bank under IDA, another program also with USAID called ICRA. That was tremendous capability to take science to the farmers and not
Right.
only reach few farmers, but to really hundreds of thousands of farmers, if not millions.
Absolutely. You mentioned something that I think is really important, and that's that South to South cooperation and sharing of knowledge and data and resources. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
So the fact that CGR is mostly based in the global South have allowed us really over the 60 plus years of our existence to build very strong relationship with the countries that we serve, but also the countries that host us. So, for example, in Kenya, in Nairobi, we have two centers. We have the International Livestock Research Institute, and we have the C4 ICRA on agroforestry. So, and the fact that we are mostly in countries in the global south, we have been part and parcel of working with the national system. And as we have seen over the last 20 years, there is a surge of South-South collaboration, but also South-South triangular cooperation with the global
Mm,
North. So we are developing a program with China, for example, on more collaboration between Africa and China. We are
mm,
doing a program between Brazil and Africa, and we
mm,
are doing many other bilateral countries like
right.
Morocco with Ethiopia or Ethiopia with Ivory Coast and so on and so forth. So we do the fact that we are mostly in the global south have allowed us to work with different national systems and be part and parcel of different programs, including the South-South collaboration program of FAO, but also the program that exists in International Atomic Energy, IAA, or other UN organizations as well. And I think we need more of that.
Really, really
We need
important.
more.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. You mentioned taking science to the farmers, and I wonder if the CGIAR is also interested in, before the science is developed, before the research is done, talking to the farmers, involving them in that participatory process.
Absolutely. I think nobody is doing science now without including the farmers. I think really when we don't talk about participatory, that was back in the 60s, 70s.
Right.
I think from the 90s to now, it has been really proven that co-design with the farmer or the user, whomever is the user, it's very important. And I think CGR, be it in our breeding program, be it in our policy work, be it in our data generation work, we have been really engaging the stakeholders at large, but particularly
Mm,
the farmers when we talk about breeding. So it's very important to take the context in consideration and not like just take it in consideration. It's rather uh, build your innovation within that
right.
context. And the only way to do it is to engage the partners that live in that context. Sometimes we might understand a bit the soil and the weather and this and that, but the context is beyond that. We know what we can see. We don't know what we cannot see. And we need that farmers experience over decades, over generations And that's where participatory breeding or engagement of co-design with the
Hmm.
users and with the stakeholders, it's super duper important, Dani. And I
It
think
is
that's really there is enough body of evidence that shows it's much more efficient. So from the 90s to now, we have been really building it as part and parcel of all our work.
more efficient, more impactful. And I think those innovations last longer because the farmers were involved in developing them, right? They actually use them. It's not just a tool they dismiss because it was made in a lab. It's something that they've made together with researchers and scientists. It's really exciting. You mentioned
Exactly. And it
um,
responds to something they need as well, Danny. Because when you
exactly.
co-design it, you might think that you understand their problem, but their problem maybe it's not as you have grasped it. So it's also it is much more. It's like better fit for purpose. So it is
Right.
addressing what they need. It is giving them the product that they can use, and so on and so forth. So definitely more efficient, more fit for purpose, and hence more impact.
Yeah, it's really nice to see that paradigm change and to see it have changed in real time. We've talked about farmers, they're particularly small scale farmers are often those most affected by those geopolitical events you mentioned before, the climate crisis, et cetera. But women farmers in particular, I think, experience a lot of these impacts more than their male counterparts. Can you talk about how important it is for CGIAR to focus on women farmers?
Absolutely, Dani, and apologies if I haven't mentioned it. I think, particularly for women, the inequalities are deeply entrenched in the food system. And we had really few reports that came out lately, including about 2 years ago, the status of women in the rural area by FAO. So there is more and more data to show that really we need to pay particular attention to women in the rural area. And hence, again, based on our gender platform, we have done a lot of work to understand better what are the limitations for women, particularly in terms of accessing technology, accessing land, accessing financial services, training. And we have really pushed more and more for programs that are more suited for women. So in our gender platform, we are doing more work in the rural area to provide solutions that are more useful for women, be it from bean varieties that cook much more quicker. You could think it's
Hmm.
a simple thing, but it
Sure.
not only it saves time for the woman, but also it saves energy. And that's a really full program that we were under Barbara, where in addition to have a very high nutritious bean, we worked a lot on the cooking time for those beans. We have working a lot on small machineries for women, women in terms of poultry, for example, and how could we really present poultry, but also not just poultry, poultry with an integrated mixed agriculture as
Mm.
a solution for cutting on malnutrition. I know there is a lot of misconceptions, but just one number and one slide that I saw as I was visiting Hillary is a slide that shows that for vitamin A, for example, in one egg a day, you have enough than vitamin A in 12 carrots.
Wow.
So eating 12 carrots is difficult, but eating one egg, it's very easy for a kid. So it's very important for us. And that's where the context is very specific. When we talk about malnutrition, we need to take all of these in consideration and working with women and co-designing again with women, particularly in the rural areas. It's super important in our programs at CGIAR.
I know it's important, and I wonder how difficult it is for the CGIAR system to deal with the cultural barriers that impact, whether your research can reach women because often there are cultural blocks to women being involved in some of these discussions.
I think for me, I feel like maybe we didn't invest in it enough. I don't think really it's difficult to penetrate it. Definitely having a woman talking to a woman in a rural area in certain culture make it much more easier to communicate, to understand, and we have to be sensitive to those differences and we need to take them in consideration. But I think really it's much more again the investment. Have we made enough investment or not? Have we really provide them what they need the way they need it or not? So I see really the more we design it properly,
Hmm.
and if a woman is more comfortable to talk to another woman in her own language, so be it. Let's do it. So I think it we needed to be more intentional about it. We need to
Sure.
put our targets that we need to have this number of women in this community and to target and to work mostly on their high priority. So maybe for me, I don't know, I want to just give an example. Maybe I want to work on plant A, but for
Hmm.
that community, they need plant B and C, not A. So we need
Hmm.
to be more tuned to what they need. And maybe as we are talking about women, I think for women, adaptation to climate change is very important, and nutrition is super important because they are the they are the custodians of nutrition when we talk about household, but particularly for small kids. And as we're talking about women, we need also to talk about youth. So youth is really the next big challenge. As you know, 40% of the population, for example, in Africa, it's under 15 years old.
Right.
So how could we engage these young people in agriculture? How could we bring them back to agriculture and explain to them really the challenges we have today? How could we attract them to sustainable agriculture? How could we attract them to the whole agriculture and get them to be interested in it and not run away from it because it's too difficult, it's too complicated. And I think this is also another area of work for us in CGR, where we have been really looking at ways and means to engage with youth and bring youth back to agriculture and boost the youth inclusion. We have different examples. I could give you one in China, which is the zero carbon smart village in Kinshan, where really we work with the local communities and include up to the elementary schools as we are explaining what a carbon neutral model, how could you have a proper rural development that integrates a residential house with food production systems. And we
Right.
did a lot of vegetable gardens, bamboo forests, tea gardens, and rice fields. And the
Mhm.
model really was quite interesting and attract youth. And the earlier you start, like elementary school, the best it is. We have
Nice.
several other examples in Africa and other continents as well.
That sounds really exciting. I wonder what role technology plays in making sure that youth want to be involved in agriculture. Do you think new technologies or emerging technologies are helping youth want to be involved more?
Absolutely. I think unless we bring in a technology, Dani, they're going to run away. Unless we tell them it's not only about producing, it's about producing and processing, or it's about producing and having everything with the circular economy. You use this
Right.
product for A and the other product. So unless we bring in it a tech component, a circularity component, a sustainability component, but also a higher livelihood, a higher economic return. I
Right.
don't think we're going to get youth to replace the aging population we have right now in the farming system.
Yeah, if agriculture is not economically sustainable, it's not going to work. Whether it's, sustainable in other ways, environmentally and socially sustainable, it has to be at the end of the day, economically sustainable for youth to want to be involved.
Absolutely.
Ismahan, I wonder, as we sort of wrap up this conversation, and I want to thank you for explaining, so many of the important things that the CGIAR is working on. But, given what we've talked about with the decreases in funding, the impacts of COVID still being felt, the impacts of the climate crisis, becoming more evident every day to farmers and to all of us. What is your call to action? What do you want the folks who are watching and listening to do or to tell their lawmakers or their communities? What do you want them to know?
I think, Danny, my call is that we need to to increase funding definitely for science and innovation and technology, and not only at the global level. I think there is a need for the global regional level, but also national level. So that going back to that 3% of GDP back into the science, it's very important. We have seen only a few countries doing it. I think even the least income countries, they need to invest in science. And the global community for public good, we need to invest more in finding those solutions because science is really moving very fast. So what we can do today for $10, a few years ago, we need $1,000 to do it. So
Right.
we are at a better place to innovate. And given the crisis where we are in the right investment, the right environment to create those breakthroughs and those really innovation that can help us. But we can't get there without investing in science, technology, and innovation, and in institutions like CGR, but also the national systems, the
Right.
regional systems. So we need to harness the power of science, and the power of science needs a critical mass, and that critical mass is in the CGR, is in the national system, and in making sure they partner together and work together, including
Science,
academia. Yeah,
abs
including academia. Academia is super important, and we can't let it down.
we can't. And the power of science is so important, and the power of research and the power of incredible women like you. Thank you so much for your time today. You know how much I admire you, and I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Dani. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.